Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today we're jumping into some ProRevenge. Our first story today comes to us from Ock Lemon. Don't mess with an engineer. Let's jump right in. I worked for a company that provides specialized equipment used in manufacturing. To protect my anonymity, I'll have to be vague about what exactly this machine does. During my time working in this field, I got to know many clients who would need these machines installed and serviced. One of these customers we'll call Jake. I later left the company for a different job, but Jake apparently kept my number. One afternoon, I got a call from Jake that they wanted a new unit installed and another unit needed maintenance and wanted to know if I was available. I let him know that I left the company but that I could pass him on to someone who could help. He tells me he'll pay 2 times my current rate to install the unit over the weekend. He lets me know that the company has increased the rates for installation and the company just can't afford it. The instructions they sent over just aren't clear enough and their engineers are scratching their heads trying to figure it out. He begs me to consider it and I agree. For more context, installing this unit can take a good few hours or up to a day on your own. The company gives you 2 options. You can either pay for an engineer to come and install it, or you can save money and they will send instructions so the customer's own engineers can install it. The instructions aren't easy to follow and it's company policy that if someone has started to install the equipment, the supplier wouldn't get involved since they couldn't verify that any of the pieces were broken. This will be important later. I drive down on the weekend and they show me the boxes of equipment. I set to work and make good progress installing the unit. Around 6 hours in and I'm stopped by Jake who greets me. I let him know I'm nearly finished and he tells me, "Sorry, but they just don't have the budget to pay you." He understands my frustration, but his engineers can take it from here. To say I was frustrated was an understatement. I wanted revenge. There's a small button inside the unit that changes the unit into test mode. This is done to perform maintenance on the unit, but it's impossible to configure the unit with this button pressed. It's only possible to reach this button using a pin, so it's not easily pressed during installation. Because of this, the installation instructions don't mention it. There's no real way of telling the equipment is in test mode, it just won't work normally. I think you can guess where this is going. I click the button, collect my things, and leave. Monday morning, I get a call from Jake. I declined. I knew my old company wouldn't get involved since I already started installing the unit. I knew his engineers would never figure it out. I just had to let him stew. A few days later, with many missed calls, I finally pick up. Jake is furious. He asks me where the hell I've been and why I haven't been picking up the phone. He tells me they can't figure out how to configure the machine and they need my help. I tell him, "Why is this my problem? You won't pay me." He told me he was sorry and they would work something out if I could get there as soon as possible. I told him, "Oh no, you're gonna pay me £7,000 up front before I do anything." I'd never felt this powerful before. He screamed at me for a bit and hung up. He called back a day later after saying he's sorry for how he acted and said that if I could come fix it, he would pay me in a totally defeated tone. He tried to fight it saying he'll pay when I was done, but I was having none of it. After a bit of back and forth, he agrees to pay me. The money hit my account and I came in the next day. The look of confusion over his face when I took out a pin and changed the unit from test mode was priceless. It was even more priceless seeing his reaction to me packing up my tools and leaving after only 20 minutes of configuring. Easiest £7,000 I've ever made. Don't try to mess with a professional problem solver. Ah yes, OP, they didn't pay you to press a button, they paid you because you knew which button to press, and also because you knew that there was a button to press. In fact, I think they paid you because you pressed their buttons. I think the only thing I would have done different in this case is I would have said, well, it's £7,000 today, but if we have to wait until tomorrow to get an answer, it's £8,000. Do me a quick favor and take a look down below the video. If that subscribe button's still red, it means you're actually not subscribed to the KCC channel. Please hit that subscribe button for more daily Reddit stories. This next story comes to us from Few Understand Satoshi. You didn't get it in writing. No, you. Let's jump right in. Here is a story about the first job that I had a decade ago. Disclaimer, some vagueness ahead because both parties, the company and myself, displayed some awful behavior leading to some horrendous consequences for all in the name of revenge. So I was a new but qualified recruit in a small team that was working with a very large client and stakeholder in the company. Despite my skills, it was my first real job fresh out of grad school, so I was inexperienced with office politics, contract law, power hierarchies, etc. The client had given us an almost impossible task to prototype a complex solution to a technical problem that they had. As the only one in the team with the relevant expertise, the burden quickly fell on me to deliver alone, while the others essentially managed. The team leader and effective boss promised me at the beginning that I would get a bonus worth roughly 30% of the salary on which I was hired. Apparently, this bonus was a direct financial contribution from the big client themselves, and the wheels were in motion to get this extra cash. Great, but not really because it was not in writing. Over the next 2 years, however, no such bonus compensation transpired. I would periodically and half-heartedly ask about this bonus during in-person meetings, and I was verbally reassured it was on its way. In hindsight, I would have been more assertive and perhaps sent an email, but again, I was a newbie and unwilling to bite the hand that feeds, so to speak. After these 2 years, the company began to expand business with the client as a direct result of the work that I did on the impossible project. At some point, the clients even present all of that hard work of mine at some international conferences, of course, claiming it as their intellectual property and proprietary solution. Although the project ownership rightfully and lawfully belonged to them, the lack of acknowledgement left a bitter taste in my mouth. And worse was that money flowing around and both companies were profiting from the 2 years of painstaking effort, but there was no bonus in sight. So my contract was also nearing its end in the 3rd year. Obviously, the company wanted to retain me to continue on this project. I was the only one who knew the ins and outs of it. It would be a joint employment between the company and client, as I would be tasked with transitioning the project from the company to the client, which would require several more years to do so. I also went through half a year of specialist training with the clients. Only I could do this job for the foreseeable future. For this, I was offered a decent increase in my salary, but that missing bonus was ruining my trust. At a contract negotiation meeting, I asked about it one last time. The team leader and boss said that they had no recollection of such an agreement or offer, and that I should have got it in writing. Fair enough. Some lessons are learned the hard way. But the worst realization was that the missing bonus, a measly 30% of the new hire salary for almost 3 years, was now earmarked for an intern to join me on the project. It was almost a 1-to-1 calculation, as the client would sponsor the intern with the funds that were intended bonus for me. It was the last week of the work contract, and Human Resources had invited me to double-check the document before I was to sign it. Of course, given all the time, money, training, and resources invested in me continuing on this project, and my very real eagerness to do it, it was assumed that I would be here for the long haul, and the work contract was a formality. So what happened next is something that I do not recommend that anyone try at home, or work for that matter. It was a moment of impulse from a reckless youth. However, I was feeling particularly vengeful about this missing bonus. My ego had been bruised because I wrongly trusted them to follow through, but I was not clever enough to get the agreement in writing. Well, Uno reverse card moment, there was also no written agreement on my end, so I had not yet signed a contract. I carefully double-checked my emails, and there was nothing in writing where I agreed to continue on this project or even this job. In fact, I had just been verbally enthusiastic about the project during meetings with my boss and the clients. The first new workday rolls around when I am officially no longer employed at the company or with the clients. I gave no notice and no warnings. I just abandoned them. On the previous day, I had left my company pager and phone in the office locker. I had to sacrifice a few personal possessions on the office desk. I logged out of the work email and messenger system so they could not reach me. I'm not sure how they responded because I ignored and deflected every single communication which came my way for following months. It was bliss knowing that I probably caused this company a major catastrophe for the next few years at least. Of course, I could not predict the consequences that they would face from abrupt and an unannounced exit. But I did not have time to care about them. I had to become selfish, and I had to dip into my savings and relocate and start afresh and anew in another city far away, which was very difficult without references, considering the professional bridge that I had just burnt, hence the not recommending part. But eventually, my skills began to speak for themselves. The last I heard about the company was from an ex-colleague as we reconnected on an online professional network a few years ago. Apparently, the company still exists, but it is a shell of its former self as things went horribly south after I left. They lost the big client as I had anticipated. No one else had the skill set to do the work. The clients are still players in the sector, but I have the great fortune of not having had to interact with them so far. But I could not have predicted the domino effect that followed in the company. A few more large clients followed soon after because staff had to be reshuffled to do my project, and these other clients felt neglected. Now they are downsizing and in the process of being swallowed by a competitor. From what I gather, the other big casualty of the revenge is my ex-boss developed some substance problem around this time to cope with this stress, triggered in part by not being able to contact me for months on end during a critical time in the company's expansion. Throw in a divorce too, because this work stress destroyed the marriage as well. I did feel a little bit guilty when my ex-colleague explained all this, and still do. Is it enough for me to right my wrongs and write an apology or something? Not really, but perhaps I am wrong here. I am open to suggestions. Note, this ex-boss has tried to get in touch with me a few more times, some years after things went downhill, but I was too busy, so I just continued the ghosting strategy. But anyway, here is to Dumbbutt Incorporated. I hope it was worth the measly bonus that I deserved. I was brought on as a new recruit, and I was junior, who had to lead the project from the get-go. I had to work hard and learn new skills in the hours outside of work so the fat clients and middle management could reap the rewards, not on my vengeful watch. The reason that I'm writing this is that it's somewhat cathartic. The company did some crappy things, and so did I. But this missing bonus still eats me from time to time. I could have bought a house, and I could have settled down in that old town. I wouldn't have been displaced for months and living with my head just above the water, having to rebuild myself for a good few years following that. Abandoning the project and the job was professional suicide at the time, but my revenge was such that whatever happened, I would try to get through life without groveling back to that company. Of course, this arrogant buttholery of mine, born from this hatred having not gotten that bonus, still has at least one unwritten chapter. At the current workplace, where I am also a stakeholder now, I am now proposing a new version of that old project I began a decade ago and never got a chance to see to completion. It would be nice to showcase a patent during an international conference attended by the big former clients. That would be the real bonus. So yeah, mistakes all around with at best mixed endings for all parties. But at least it is finally good to get this in writing. Any company that puts all of their eggs in one basket for a project that is big enough that it could tank the whole company is incredibly stupid. Okay, I understand they thought that OP was going to stay in the job because they were so enthusiastic about the whole thing. But what would happen if OP all of a sudden got hit by a bus? There was no contingency plan there at all. OP might have been young and dumb and new, but I can guarantee you that that company knew what bonus you were talking about. They just took advantage of you, plain and simple. This next story comes to us from Echo1771. I went from school teacher to chairman of the board of a big company for the sake of revenge. Let's jump right in. When I was a tiny kid, my father was my best friend. He worked multiple jobs to support my family, all while powering his way through law school. He even built a couple of small businesses from the ground up with a couple of his friends. All while doing this, he managed to be the best dad ever, spending as much time as he could with my mother, myself, and my baby siblings. One day, we found out that he had stage 4 stomach cancer, the kind that you don't recover from. My mother and I stayed by his side all the way till it was all over. The last memory I have of my father was when he was completely immobile, practically a vegetable at this point, with tubes going in and out of his body, and me just praying that he'd still be able to remember who I was. All the guy could do was smile at me just to let me know he still recognized his son, even if the doctors told us most of his memories would be gone. Eventually, he fell into a coma for some days before waking up to say goodbye to my mother, who was by his side when he died. She was a housewife, so we really didn't have much to go on after his death. Enter my grandfather. He was one of those self-centered boomer types who makes everything about himself. After my father died, he'd use the newspaper obituary to boast about his dead son's grades and achievements, which I realized seemed to be the only thing my dad was to him. Just in case you were wondering, yes, we are Asian. My mother was grieving and trying to find a way to make ends meet, and my grandfather graciously offered to help her control my father's 2 businesses to help support us. My mother agreed because she didn't have any experience. While we grew up, the 2 businesses didn't provide much for us, likely because my father was one of the big reasons they were thriving. Mom was in and out of multiple jobs just to keep us floating. My grandfather offered to help put me and my siblings through school. I managed to score some scholarships with some good schools growing up, so thankfully he didn't have to do as much for me, but we were really glad that he helped out with my siblings. After I made it out of school, I found out that my family was broke and my 2 siblings were still making their way through medical school. My sister even offered to stop and just get a job, but I told her to keep going because she was doing so well and that she deserved to graduate. My grandparents had cut us off because they didn't approve of the direction my siblings took in life, especially my sister, who was, for them, too female to have a career in medicine. My grandmother is a bit of a misogynist. Why are you wasting your time and money becoming a doctor? You're just going to have children and quit. I was working as a high school teacher when I was contacted by one of my dad's old business partners for one of his companies. After I asked him about how the company was doing, he told me that my grandfather, who was still in control of my father's shares, was siphoning money from the company for himself, and he was earning way more than he was giving me and my siblings for our education. So all our lives, he'd been making us feel indebted to him for money that was supposed to be ours to begin with, and he lied to us by telling us that Dad's companies weren't making any money for us at all. We also realized that when he cut us off, he was cutting us off from our own money, forcing my siblings to drop out and give up careers that they'd been working their whole lives for. What's worse is that this was our father's money, and we know that he'd wanted it to help us provide for our futures, even after he died. And here comes his butthole father basically crapping on his legacy for his own enrichment. I even found out that he used his position to take possession of the company's office space and force them to set up shop in a smaller, cheaper office while renting the original space out under his own name to the company's competitors to make money from them too, all while I had to work multiple jobs to help my mother and siblings pay the bill. Cue revenge. My grandfather's biggest weakness has always been his pride. In fact, I suspected that he wanted us to think he was helping support us out of his own pocket because he wanted everyone to think he was some kind of hero, when in reality, he was financially choking us. I recognized that no matter what my grandfather said, my siblings, my mother, and I were legally the owners of my father's company shares. So after having a statement signed by the 3 of them, I approached all the board of directors, sans my grandfather, and let them know that I was now that sole representative of my late dad's estate. My grandfather also made himself chairman of the board. According to the company records, he did no work for the company at all, so the position was just a name that allowed him to receive money. So I convinced them that since he was only chairman as representative of my father's estate, that made me the chairman. I did not intend to keep the position because I did not have the experience for it. Then I contacted other members of my extended family about my grandfather's unethical practices with the company's office space. He was eventually pressured by them into evicting the company's main competitor from their office space. Serves them right for conniving with my grandfather to take the company's old office space. At the next board meeting, I prepared for the moment I'd been waiting for my entire life. When he entered the conference room to preside over the meeting as the chairman, he found his chair facing away from the table, with all the board members already seated at the table. And like a Bond villain, I spun the chair around to reveal to him that I'd been the one sitting there the entire meeting. I told him that the company and my family no longer needed him, and that I'd be taking control over representation of my father's estate. "Do you know that I'm the one who put him and his siblings through school?" he said in shock. I only went, "No, Dad did." The look of sheer embarrassment on his face was perfect. I've never seen him look defeated my entire life until that moment, and this sort of satisfaction could not be achieved by simply ratting him out. I stepped down from the chairman position and took a job in the company's treasury department as a bookkeeper with a meager salary. But at least now any profit sharing or dividends that the company released would go where my father wanted it to go. And finally, one of the first decisions I got to make as a board member before stepping down was to give my mother a permanent job that she deserved. My grandfather is now jobless. He spends all his time at home, and because he spent his life being selfish and self-centered, he has no friends. All he had going for him was being able to power trip over other people and boasting about his assets and achievements. Even my grandmother has had it with him, and the two don't even sleep in the same room anymore. I hope he lives the rest of his short life regretting that he didn't live his life with more compassion and humility. It was actually pretty good to see in this case that OP realized they weren't qualified to run the company and stepped down after exacting their revenge. They recognized their own limitations, and that is definitely not a sign of weakness. Check out all 3 OPs linked in the description down below. I thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.